The salvage yards of stations stretched for kilometers in every direction, a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams floating in the void between stars. Captain Sarah had spent the last 3 years picking through the wreckage left behind by the HFY War, searching for anything valuable enough to keep her small crew fed and her ship running. The war had ended badly for humanity. The Galactic HFY, a coalition of 12 advanced alien species, had crushed human resistance in less than 2 years. Earth's colonies were stripped of resources, their populations relocated to labor camps, and their technology confiscated. Humanity was relegated to the bottom tier of galactic society, barely above the status of livestock. Sarah's ship, the Defiant Scrap, was itself a testament to humanity's fall. Cobbled together from the remains of a destroyed human frigate, 2 alien cargo haulers, and more spare parts than anyone could count, it looked like exactly what it was: junk. But it flew, and more importantly, it was invisible to most scanners. The hegemony forces didn't bother tracking garbage haulers. "Captain, you need to see this," called her chief engineer and closest friend since the war. His voice carried an excitement she hadn't heard in months. Sarah floated through the cramped corridors of her ship, past recycled air processors and jury-rigged power conduits. The artificial gravity was set to minimum to save power, making every movement a careful dance. She found in the cargo bay, standing next to their latest haul. The object before them was unlike anything in the salvage yard. Sleek where everything else was jagged, pristine where everything else was scorched, it gleamed with an inner light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The thing was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a cargo container, but covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Found it buried under a pile of hegemony cruiser wreckage," explained, his dark eyes wide with wonder. "The scanner readings are off the charts. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah approached the object carefully. Something about it made her skin crawl and her heart race at the same time. "Any idea what it is?" "Not a clue, but look at this." Activated his portable scanner, pointing it at the object. The device immediately started screaming warnings and displaying readings that fluctuated wildly. "Whatever this thing is, it's older than anything we've ever found, and it's still active." Doctor there emerged from behind the object where she had been taking detailed measurements. Her usually steady hands were trembling slightly as she held her research tablet. "I've cross-referenced the symbols with every known language database we have. Nothing even comes close. But the energy signatures suggest this predates the oldest known civilization by millions of years." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The galaxy was full of ruins and relics from dead civilizations, but most were thoroughly understood and by the hegemony's scientists. Finding something truly unknown was like discovering fire. "We need to be careful," she said finally. "The last thing we need is hegemony attention." As if summoned by her words, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. Tommy Park, their pilot and youngest crew member, burst into the cargo bay. "Captain, we've got incoming. 3 hegemony patrol ships closing fast." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Hegemony patrols meant inspections, and inspections meant confiscation of anything valuable. If they found the artifact, humanity would lose what might be their only chance at something better. "Can we hide it?" "Not in time. Those ships will be here in minutes." Sarah's mind raced through options. They could jettison the artifact, but that would just hand it over to the hegemony. They could run, but their patched-together ship couldn't outrun military vessels. They could fight, but that was suicide. Then she noticed something strange. The artifact's pulsing light had grown brighter since the alarm started. The symbols on its surface were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. "Is it reacting to the ships?" she asked. Checked her instruments frantically. "The energy output is increasing exponentially. It's almost like it's waking up." The hegemony ships dropped out of hyperspace just outside the salvage yard. Sarah recognized the lead vessel immediately. The Dominator's Fist, a heavy cruiser commanded by Admiral, one of the most vicious hegemony officers in this sector. The alien had personally overseen the destruction of 3 human colonies during the war. "Human vessel, prepare to be boarded," came's translated voice over the communication system. His species, resembled massive insects with 4 arms and compound eyes. "Standard inspection protocols are in effect." Sarah had no choice but to comply. "Understood, Admiral. We're powering down weapons and preparing for boarding." "What weapons?" muttered under his breath. Their ship barely had functional shields, let alone weapons worth mentioning. As the hegemony boarding shuttle approached, Sarah made a desperate decision. She placed her hand directly on the artifact's surface. The moment her skin made contact, the world exploded into light and sound and sensation beyond human comprehension. Images flooded her mind. Vast ships moving between stars, beings of pure energy reshaping galaxies, civilizations rising and falling like waves on a cosmic beach. And through it all, a voice that spoke directly into her consciousness. "Child of the third evolution, why do you wake us from our slumber?" Sarah somehow found the strength to form thoughts coherent enough to respond. "My people are enslaved. We need help. Show us these oppressors." Without knowing how, Sarah shared her memories of the war, the defeat, the camps, the systematic subjugation of humanity. She felt the presence examining each memory with ancient, terrible attention. "We see, these hegemony species are known to us. They were young when we last walked among the stars. They have grown arrogant in our absence." The boarding shuttle latched onto their ship's airlock. Sarah could hear the mechanical sounds of the outer door opening. "What are you?" she managed to ask. "We are what remains of the first civilization. We are the architects of possibility, and we have been waiting for a species worthy of our gifts." "Waiting for what?" "Waiting for a species desperate enough to take the risks necessary to wield ultimate power. Waiting for a species with nothing left to lose." The airlock's inner door began to cycle open. Sarah could hear hegemony soldiers moving through her ship. "What do you want from us?" "Partnership. You possess something we have long sought. The ability to grow from adversity, to find strength in weakness, to create hope from despair. In return, we offer you the tools to reshape the galaxy according to your will." Admiral's massive form appeared in the cargo bay doorway, flanked by 4 armed soldiers. His compound eyes immediately fixed on the glowing artifact. "What is this?" he demanded, raising a weapon that could have punched a hole through their ship's hull. Sarah felt power flowing through her from the artifact, knowledge and capability beyond anything she had ever imagined. She stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "This is the beginning of the end of your empire." Slav was like breaking glass. "Foolish human, do you think your scavenged trinkets can threaten the might of the hegemony?" "I think," Sarah said as the artifact's light grew blindingly bright, "that you're about to learn why humanity survived when so many other species didn't." The artifact erupted with energy that transformed everything it touched. The walls of the cargo bay flowed like liquid, reshaping themselves into configurations that followed no known physics. The hegemony soldiers' weapons simply ceased to function, their molecular bonds rearranged into harmless components. Admiral himself found his exoskeleton fusing with the deck plating, leaving him immobilized but unharmed. "Impossible," he whispered. "The architects have been dead for eons." "Not dead," Sarah corrected him, feeling the vast intelligence of the artifact settling into her mind like a familiar coat. "Sleeping, and now we're awake and we're very interested in meeting your superiors." Around them, the salvage yard was transforming. Pieces of scrap metal were flowing together, guided by forces that turned debris into purpose-built components. The wreckage of 1,000 different ships was becoming something new, something that had never existed before. Stared in awe as their own ship grew and shifted around them. "Sarah, what did you do?" "I made a deal," she said, watching through new senses as similar transformations began occurring across the galaxy, wherever humans had hidden caches of salvage and scrap. "And I think it's going to be a very good deal for us." In the depths of space, automated distress signals began broadcasting on hegemony military frequencies. On dozens of worlds, human salvage operations were suddenly becoming something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The galaxy's discarded junk was awakening, and it was hungry for revenge. Admiral watched in horror as his patrol ships were enveloped by clouds of transformed debris that moved with predatory intelligence. His last coherent thought before the communication systems went dark was a desperate attempt to warn Hegemony High Command. But it was already too late. Across the galaxy, humanity's greatest weakness was becoming its greatest strength. Every piece of junk, every salvage yard, every scrap of discarded metal was now a potential weapon in the hands of a species that had learned to survive by making something from nothing. The architects had chosen their champions well. Humanity's long apprenticeship in desperation was about to pay dividends that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. From the scattered remnants of their defeat, humans were about to build something the galaxy had never seen. A civilization born from junk and tempered by injustice, guided by ancient wisdom and driven by a very human desire for revenge. The age of scrap was about to begin, and the hegemony was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you've already beaten. 3 months after the awakening at Station, the galaxy had become a very different place. What the hegemony military initially dismissed as isolated incidents had grown into a pattern that all their understanding of warfare, technology, and human capability. Commander Zephyr Blackwood crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a hegemony supply depot on Minerva Prime, watching through enhanced optics as the enemy tried to understand what had happened to their facility. The depot had been transformed overnight into something that looked like it belonged in a fever dream. Organic curves where there should have been right angles, surfaces that seemed to shift when not directly observed, and a central spire that hummed with barely contained energy. "Status report, Commander," came Sarah's voice through the quantum entanglement communicator that had somehow grown from the artifact's technology. Her voice carried new harmonics now, layers of meaning that spoke directly to the enhanced human consciousness that every salvage crew member had developed. "Depot 7 is completely converted," Zephyr reported, watching as a squad of soldiers approached the transformed building only to have their weapons dissolve into component atoms when they got too close. "Local hegemony forces are maintaining a perimeter, but they're too afraid to get within 100 meters. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Humanity's former oppressors, who had once strode across human worlds like gods among insects, were now afraid to approach structures built from their own discarded equipment. Zephyr's team was one of dozens spread across this sector of space, all working to implement what the architects called the Great Recursion. Every piece of technology the hegemony had discarded, every facility they had abandoned, every scrap of metal they had thrown away was being reclaimed and transformed into something new. The transformation wasn't limited to technology. Zephyr could feel the change in herself, in the way her mind processed information and her body responded to challenges. The architect's symbiosis didn't just provide tools, it evolved the user. Humans were becoming something more than they had been, while somehow remaining fundamentally human. "How are the new recruits adapting?" Sarah asked. Zephyr glanced at the dozen former human slaves who had joined her team in the past month. They were all volunteers, people who had escaped from hegemony labor camps and made their way to the growing network of human-controlled salvage operations. The transformation process was intense, but none had failed to adapt. "Better than expected," she replied. "The architect integration seems to work more smoothly with humans than it did with the precursor species, something about our neural plasticity and adaptive capacity." It was true. The ancient records the architects shared showed centuries of failed attempts to find a suitable partner species. They had been too rigid in their thinking. The morphic collective had dissolved into chaos when exposed to unlimited possibility. The Eternal Empire had tried to dominate the architects and been destroyed for their arrogance. But humans were different. Humans had evolved in a world where survival required constant adaptation, where making tools from limited resources was the difference between life and death. The partnership with the architects felt natural in a way that surprised even the ancient entities. "Movement in orbit," reported Jake Martinez from his position on a nearby hilltop. His enhanced senses could now track individual spacecraft across solar system distances. "3 heavy cruisers and a battleship. Looks like they're finally ready to try direct assault." Zephyr smiled grimly. The hegemony had been escalating their response for weeks, moving from confused patrol actions to coordinated military strikes. But they still didn't understand what they were facing. "Let them come." Sarah's voice carried amusement that would have been terrifying to anyone who knew what humans were capable of when properly motivated. "It's time they learned what we've been building." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On Station, the original salvage yard had become a massive construction facility that conventional understanding of engineering. Ships weren't built there so much as grown, their hulls forming from clouds of transformed matter that somehow knew exactly what shape they needed to take. The vessels emerging from these facilities looked nothing like traditional spacecraft. They were organic and mechanical simultaneously, with hulls that could heal damage and weapons that adapted to whatever resistance they encountered. More importantly, they were crewed by humans who had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Admiral, still trapped in the transformed metal of Sarah's ship, had become an unwilling observer of humanity's evolution. The artifact's influence allowed him to understand what was happening even as it prevented him from interfering. "Your species is mad," he told Sarah during one of their conversations. "You're integrating with technology that destroyed civilizations older and more advanced than yours." "That's where you're wrong," Sarah replied, her consciousness now expanded across multiple vessels and installations. "Those civilizations tried to use the architects. We're partnering with them. There's a difference." The difference was becoming increasingly apparent. Where other species had sought to command the architect technology, humans had approached it as equals despite their technological inferiority. The result was a symbiosis that enhanced both partners rather than destroying either. The hegemony battleship Infinite Dominion dropped into Minerva Prime's atmosphere with all the subtlety of a falling mountain. Its weapons charged with enough power to glass the entire continent where the transformed depot stood. Commander Blackwood felt no fear as she watched the massive vessel descend. Instead, she felt connected to something vast and purposeful. Through the quantum link, she could sense every other human in the network. Sarah coordinating strategy from a dozen different locations, designing new weapon configurations in real time, deciphering architect archives that revealed the true history of the galaxy. "All units implement Contingency 7, Sarah's voice carried across the network. Zephyr nodded and activated the beacon she had placed at the depot's base. Similar beacons were activating across the planet's surface, part of a network that had been growing quietly for weeks. The effect was immediate and devastating to hegemony expectations. The planet's surface began to shift and flow as buried caches of transformed matter responded to the beacon's signals. Mountains reshaped themselves into launch platforms. Valleys became focusing arrays for energy weapons that drew power directly from the planet's core. The Infinite Dominion fired its main batteries at the depot, unleashing enough destructive force to vaporize a city. The beams struck a barrier that appeared just meters above the building's spire, energy that should have annihilated everything instead being absorbed and redirected back at the attacking ship. Admiral, the Hegemony Task Force commander, watched in disbelief as his most powerful weapons were turned against his own fleet. "Impossible! No known technology can redirect coherent energy at that magnitude." His science officer, a nervous with pale blue skin, checked his instruments frantically. "Sir, the energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. It's as if the entire planet has become a single massive weapon system." That was exactly what had happened. The architects had taught humanity to think in terms of systems rather than individual components. Why build a few powerful ships when you could transform entire worlds into defensive networks? Why create static installations when you could make the very ground beneath an enemy's feet into a weapon? The hegemony fleet found itself caught in a web of transformed matter that had been invisible until activated. Asteroids they had passed on their approach to the planet suddenly revealed themselves as camouflaged weapons platforms. The space debris they had dismissed as navigational hazards began moving with predatory purpose. "Fleet Admiral," came a transmission on all frequencies, Sarah's voice now carrying harmonics that made hegemony translation systems struggle to process the meaning. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system or face the consequences of your actions." Laughed, the sound carrying all the arrogance of a species that had never known true defeat. "Humans do not give ultimatums to the hegemony. We are your superiors in every way that matters." "You were our superiors," Sarah corrected him. "Past tense. You had your chance to treat us as equals. Now you get to experience what it feels like to be the inferior species." The 30 seconds passed in silence. Then the galaxy learned what human creativity could accomplish when backed by architect technology and motivated by 3 years of accumulated grievance. The attack didn't come from any obvious source. Instead, the hegemony ship simply began coming apart from the inside as their own systems turned against them. Hull plates rearranged themselves into new configurations. Weapon batteries rotated to target their own ships. Life support systems began producing compounds that were harmless to humans, but caused immediate unconsciousness in most hegemony species. Admiral found his command chair flowing around his body like liquid metal, restraining him gently but completely. Around him, his bridge crew was being similarly immobilized by their own equipment. How, he gasped, his translator struggling with human language concepts that had no hegemony equivalent. Your ships are built with materials from 1,000 different worlds. Sarah's voice came from every speaker on the bridge simultaneously. Materials that included trace amounts of matter we had already transformed. Did you really think we wouldn't think to prepare for this? It was true. For months, humans had been seeding the galaxy's supply chains with transformed matter so subtle it was undetectable by conventional sensors. Every hegemony facility, every ship, every weapon contained at least small amounts of material that could be activated when needed. The implications were staggering. If humans could turn the hegemony's own technology against them, then nowhere in the galaxy was truly safe from human influence. This is only the beginning, Sarah continued as reports flooded in from across the sector. Similar scenes were playing out around dozens of star systems as human salvage teams revealed the true scope of their preparations. You wanted to treat us like animals? Now you get to learn what happens when you cage a species that never forgot how to hunt. Commander Blackwood watched as the Infinite Dominion was carefully disassembled by its own systems, its crew being relocated to holding areas that formed spontaneously from the ship's own hull material. It was efficient, precise, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Sarah, she said over the quantum link, what happens when the hegemony leadership realizes the full scope of what we've accomplished? They'll do exactly what we expect them to do, came the reply, carrying overtones of satisfaction that made Blackwood's enhanced nervous system tingle with anticipation. They'll panic, consolidate their forces, and try to strike at what they perceive as our center of power. And then we show them what humans can do when we stop holding back. Across the galaxy, the hegemony's carefully ordered civilization was discovering that their discarded junk had become their greatest enemy. Every piece of scrap metal, every abandoned facility, every overlooked detail of human ingenuity was now part of a vast network that spanned hundreds of star systems. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were rewriting the rules of galactic warfare, turning the hegemony's own strength against them while revealing capabilities that made no sense according to any known scientific principles. In hidden installations and converted salvage yards, human engineers worked alongside architect intelligence to design weapons and defenses that existed at the intersection of technology and imagination. Ships that could phase through solid matter, soldiers who could manipulate gravity with their thoughts, weapons that turned enemy equipment into allies with a touch. The age of scrap was in full swing, and the galaxy's former masters were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous revolution comes from those who have already lost everything, and therefore have nothing left to fear. The hegemony capital world of Dominion Prime had never seen anything like the fleet that materialized at the edge of its system. The ship's every principle of known engineering, their hulls seeming to shift between solid matter and pure energy depending on the angle of observation. They moved in formations that followed no tactical doctrine in any military database, flowing around each other like living creatures rather than mechanical constructs. Sarah stood on the command deck of her flagship, the inevitable reckoning, feeling the weight of humanity's 3-year journey from slavery to supremacy. The ship around her wasn't built so much as grown, its consciousness intertwined with her own in ways that made traditional concepts of captain and vessel obsolete. She was the ship, and the ship was her, and together they were part of something larger than either could have imagined. "Status report," she requested, her voice carrying across the quantum network that now connected every human vessel in the fleet. "All ships report ready," came's voice from the engineering vessel Scrap Phoenix. "The architect integration is at 100% across the entire fleet. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Through enhanced sensors that operated on principles the hegemony couldn't comprehend, Sarah observed the massive defensive installations surrounding Dominion Prime. Orbital platforms the size of cities, energy shields that could deflect stellar radiation, weapons capable of destroying entire fleets with single shots. It was the most heavily defended world in known space, protected by the accumulated military might of 12 different species. What do the historical records tell us about this place? Sarah asked. Doctor's response came from the research vessel Memory of Earth, her consciousness now expanded to simultaneously access millions of years of architect archives. Dominion Prime was built on the ruins of the previous galactic capital. The hegemony destroyed the Synthesis Commonwealth to claim this system. Before that, it was the heart of the Unity Empire. This world has been the center of galactic power for over 10,000 years. Then it's time for a change, Sarah said, feeling the agreement of millions of human minds across the galaxy. The transformation of humanity had reached every corner of known space. Former slaves had become something beyond the comprehension of their former masters, and now they were ready to claim their rightful place among the stars. On Dominion Prime's surface, Emergency Chancellor convened the Hegemony High Council in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. The massive, usual composure had cracked under the weight of reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Human uprisings weren't just succeeding, they were redefining what victory looked like. The situation is worse than our worst projections, reported Intelligence Director, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns. 17 core worlds have gone dark. 43 military installations have been converted or destroyed. Our own technology is being turned against us in ways our scientists insist are physically impossible. How many ships have we lost? Demanded Admiral, his serpentine species representing the hegemony's naval forces. That's the problem, replied her harmonics carrying notes of disbelief. We haven't lost any ships. They've been converted. The crews are alive and unharmed, but the vessels themselves now respond to human control. It's as if the ships have developed loyalty to a different master. Chancellor slammed a massive fist against the council table, leaving a crater in the reinforced material. This is impossible. Humans are a primitive species. They barely had space travel when we conquered them. Perhaps, suggested Counselor of the, we underestimated their potential for growth. The council chamber fell silent as they considered the implications. The hegemony had maintained galactic dominance for two based on the simple principle that might made right. The strongest species ruled, the weakest served, and the natural order was maintained through superior technology and military force. But humans had shattered that paradigm. They had taken the galaxy's discarded junk and transformed it into weapons that their former masters couldn't understand or counter. More disturbing still, they had done it not through conquest, but through partnership with forces older than the hegemony itself. Sir, interrupted a communications officer, his voice trembling with fear, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting permission to land. Requesting? Slaff was like breaking stone. They destroy half our empire and then request permission. The main display activated, showing Sarah standing on what appeared to be a bridge made of crystallized starlight. Behind her, the cosmos itself seemed to flow like liquid, stars rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Chancellor, Sarah's voice carried harmonics that made the council chamber's walls resonate sympathetically. My name is Sarah, speaking for the free humans of the galaxy. We're here to discuss terms. Terms struggled to process the concept of negotiating with former slaves. You are rebels and terrorists. The hegemony does not negotiate with criminals. Sarah's smile carried depths of meaning that made several council members step backward involuntarily. You're right. The hegemony doesn't negotiate, but you're no longer the hegemony. You're the former government of a galaxy that has moved beyond your understanding. She gestured, and the display showed scenes from across known space. Worlds where humans and aliens work together in perfect harmony. Space installations where impossible technologies solved problems that had plagued civilization for. Ships that traveled between dimensions as easily as they moved through normal space. This is what the galaxy looks like now, Sarah continued. This is what happens when species work together instead of trying to dominate each other. The architects showed us how to build something better than empire. They showed us how to build partnership. Admiral leaned forward aggressively. Fancy displays won't save you when our full battle fleet arrives. We have 10,000 ships converging on this system. We know, Sarah replied calmly. We've been watching them approach for days. Would you like to see what happened to them? The display shifted to show space near the system's edge. What should have been the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history was instead a collection of ships moving in peaceful formation alongside human vessels. Crew members of a dozen different species worked side by side on vessels that seemed to merge the best aspects of every technology tradition. Conversion, not destruction, Sarah explained. We've learned that you catch more flies with honey than with plasma cannons. Your crews are unharmed, but they've seen what we're offering. They've chosen to join us rather than fight us. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. If the hegemony's own military forces were defecting in, then the foundation of their empire had already crumbled. "What do you want?" Chancellor asked, his voice carrying the defeat he was trying to hide. "We want you to step down," Sarah said simply. "We want you to acknowledge that the age of domination is over and the age of cooperation has begun. We want you to help us build something better." "And if we refuse?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but the background behind her began to move faster, stars wheeling in complex patterns that suggested vast forces in motion. "Then you'll discover what happens when a species that learned survival from working with limited resources decides to stop being polite." On cue, the defensive platforms surrounding Dominion Prime began to shift. Their weapons rotated away from the human fleet and toward the planet's surface. The energy shields flickered as their control systems responded to new programming. The orbital defense network, built over centuries and representing the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, had just changed sides. "Impossible," whispered Director. "Those systems are isolated from all external networks. There's no way to hack them remotely." "You're thinking in terms of networks and hacking," Sarah explained patiently. "We're thinking in terms of matter and consciousness. Every atom in those platforms was once part of a star. Every component was built using materials we've had contact with. Did you really think we couldn't trace those connections?" The truth was even more extraordinary than the hegemony leadership could comprehend. The architect's symbiosis didn't just allow humans to control technology. It allowed them to communicate with matter itself at a quantum level. Every piece of metal, every energy conduit, every artificial intelligence in the galaxy was now potentially part of the human network. Commander Blackwood's voice came across the communication system from the surface of Dominion Prime itself. "We've secured the primary administrative centers. Resistance was minimal. Most government personnel have agreed to cooperate with the transition." Sarah nodded. "Thank you, Commander. How are the civilian populations responding?" "Better than expected. Once they realized we weren't here to conquer but to liberate, most species have been welcoming. Turns out a lot of people were tired of living under hegemony rule." It was true. The hegemony had maintained order through fear and force, but they had never inspired genuine loyalty. When humans arrived offering partnership instead of domination, cooperation instead of subjugation, many species found the alternative appealing. Chancellor stared at the displays showing his empire dissolving around him. "Why?" he asked finally. "You have the power to destroy us. Why offer cooperation instead of revenge?" Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing the human beneath the enhanced consciousness. "Because we learned something important during our years as your slaves. Revenge feels good in the moment, but it doesn't build anything lasting. If we want to create something better than what came before, we have to be better than what came before." She gestured again, and the display showed construction projects across the galaxy. Massive space habitats that could support billions of beings. Terraforming projects that turned dead worlds into gardens. Technologies that solved scarcity, disease, and conflict through abundance rather than domination. "This is what we're building," Sarah continued. "This is what happens when you combine human adaptability with architect wisdom and the resources of an entire galaxy. We're not here to replace one empire with another. We're here to make empires obsolete." The offer was simple and complex simultaneously. The hegemony leadership could step down gracefully and help build the new galactic civilization, or they could resist and be replaced by their own people who were already joining the human-led coalition. Either way, change was inevitable. "You're asking us to surrender everything we've built," Admiral protested. "We're asking you to evolve everything you've built," Sarah corrected. "The infrastructure is still here. The knowledge is still here. The resources are still here. We just want to use them for creation instead of control." Hours of negotiation followed, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The hegemony's power had been built on military superiority and technological advantage. When both of those advantages evaporated overnight, their political structure collapsed like a house of cards. The formal surrender ceremony took place on the steps of the hegemony's Grand Assembly, with representatives from hundreds of species in attendance. Chancellor, his massive form somehow diminished by recent events, handed over the symbols of galactic authority to a coalition of humans and aliens working together. "The hegemony is ended," he declared, his voice carrying across the galaxy through quantum communication networks that had been quietly converted to human control. "Long live the cooperative." Sarah accepted the ceremonial scepter that had symbolized galactic rule for thousands of years, then immediately passed it to a mixed council of representatives from every major species. "The age of single rulers is over," she announced. "The future belongs to all of us working together." The celebration that followed lasted for days and spanned the entire galaxy. On worlds that had known only oppression, beings of every species danced together in the streets. In space, vast fleets moved in peaceful formation, their crews learning new ways of working together that transcended old prejudices and fears. In the months that followed, the transformation accelerated beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Technologies that had been suppressed or restricted under hegemony rule were shared freely. Worlds that had been stripped of resources were restored to abundance. Species that had been enemies found common ground in building something unprecedented. The architects, their ancient purpose finally fulfilled, began to withdraw from active involvement in galactic affairs. They had found their worthy successors, and those successors no longer needed guidance. "Are you ready for this?" the architect presence asked Sarah during one of their final conversations. "Ready for what?" she replied, standing on the observation deck of a space station that orbited a star that sang with artificial harmonies. "Ready to surpass us, ready to become the new shepherds of galactic civilization, ready to guide the next phase of universal evolution." Sarah smiled, feeling the weight and joy of responsibility beyond anything her species had ever imagined. Around her, humans and aliens worked side by side on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. Children of a dozen different species played together in gardens that grew in zero gravity. Artists collaborated on works that combined the aesthetic traditions of hundreds of different cultures. "I think we're ready to try," she said finally. "After all, we learned from the best teachers possible." "You learned from adversity, from necessity, from each other," the architect corrected her. "We merely provided the tools. The wisdom was always yours." As the galaxy settled into its new configuration, one truth became apparent to everyone. The humans had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had taken their greatest weakness, being underestimated, discarded, treated as worthless, and turned it into their greatest strength. From junk, they had built juggernauts. From oppression, they had created liberation. From the galaxy's discarded refuse, they had constructed a civilization that would endure for millions of years. The age of scrap had ended. The age of cooperation had begun. And throughout the galaxy, beings of every species looked up at stars that now sang with possibilities no one had ever dared imagine. Humanity's greatest revenge had been to prove that there were better ways to live than anyone had previously known. And in doing so, they had given the galaxy the greatest gift possible. Hope for a future where strength came from unity, where technology served life instead of dominating it, and where the measure of a civilization was not what it could destroy, but what it could build together. The revolution was complete, the transformation was total, and the universe would never be the same.